Great, I'm going to get started. Hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us. My name is Gemma McCall and I'm co-founder and CEO of Culture Shift, which is the Tech for Good organisation behind the development of the report and support system. I'm really proud to be, and humbled to be honest, to be hosting today's launch of the University of Leicester's new Student Sex Worker Policy and Toolkit. At Culture Shift, we imagine a future world of work and study that is safe, happy and supportive for everyone, everywhere. Our products empower organisations to tackle harassment and any bullying of all kinds and allows leaders to activate positive change in their institutions and maintain the culture they want. We are currently working with over 60 universities across the UK and Europe to improve and protect their culture. Before we get started with today's presentations, I just have some very quick housekeeping notes. If you have any questions during the session, please use the chat function at the bottom of the screen. Alternatively, you can ask your questions by emailing us at events@culture-shift.co.uk and I'm happily put your questions to the speakers at the end of the session. Please note our code of conduct rules, which we've recently introduced and a copy of which should have been sent with the joining instructions for today. We have a chat moderator who will be ensuring all participants are abiding by the code of conduct for a Culture Shift webinar. We are also recording today's webinar, so please let me know via email if you'd like me to send you a copy afterwards. The Student Support Services and EDI teams at the University of Leicester have been working together over the past year to produce this sector-leading policy and toolkit to ensure student sex workers are safe and supported. The work has been guided by Professor Teela Sanders, who has been facilitating a national coordination group since early 2020 with over 40 stakeholders and researchers, practitioners and sex work organisations. There are now several regional groups raising the profile within universities, and the activities at the University of Leicester are being used as best practice and innovative change. Today we're going to hear from the university's team, as well as a student sex worker and other experts, and then we'll have a Q&A session which is open to the whole audience at the end of the session. I'm delighted to introduce our speakers. Today we have Professor Henrietta O'Connor, who is Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion and the Head of College of Social Science, Arts and Humanities, Professor Teela Sanders, Harriet Smales, who is Wellbeing Case Manager, Professor Chris Wilkins, who is the Head of the School of Education, Faye McCarthy, who's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion team, and Jessica Heyer from Support for Student Sex Workers. I'm going to hand over now to Henrietta.
Thanks very much, Gemma. Good afternoon. Welcome to the launch event of the University of Leicester's Student Sex Worker Policy and Toolkit. My name is Henrietta O'Connor. I'm delighted to have been asked to open today's event and to have the chance to talk about this important sector-leading work. I wanted to begin by thanking Culture Shift for hosting the webinar today. We're really happy to have you with us to talk about the work we've done at the University of Leicester over the past year to try and support and protect our student sex workers. We hope that today's sessions will give you an overview of our journey with this work, as well as putting this more broadly into the wider context of universities and society. We have speakers today to talk around what students are experiencing, research in the area and lived experiences, what the university's journey has been and what we're able to offer for our student sex workers. You'll be able to ask questions throughout, and as many as possible will be answered once the speakers have finished their talks. I'm delighted as Pro-Vice-Chancellor with responsibility for equality, diversity and inclusion, because personally and professionally, I believe that all students have a right to access support from the university and local community that's fit for purpose. And I'm so glad that we're working towards a position whereby any student sex workers at the university are able to receive support in this way. The event today focuses on the work we've done over the past year, but it also marks the annual day to end violence against sex workers in 10 days' time. We know that sex workers are particularly at risk, and this of course also intersects with other marginalised groups who are already at risk of violence, such as women, including trans women and people of colour. This is just one reason why discussing sex work at an organisational level offering specific support and hosting events like this are so vitally important. I want to pass over now to Professor Tila Sanders to start with the broader context around sex work. I hope you find the session useful, and thank you again to Culture Shift for hosting today for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrietta. It's fantastic to see so many people here today. Friendly faces. I can see people here that are part of the national group and that Gemma mentioned. Great people from the regional groups as well, and hopefully people who are not that familiar with student sex work and will be learning things. So we'll just take the first slide there, Chelsea. Referring back to that day, the International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers, which will be the December 17th. So just to flag that up, the broader context there, but ultimately thinking about the stigma that sex workers face globally, the impacts of criminalisation, high levels of violence, stigma, and marginalisation that sex workers experience. So this is the broader backdrop on which the research, the policy, the practice has been developed. And really trying to bring student sex work out of the shadows and really to the fore of people's agendas and conversations. We know that sometimes it's difficult to talk about. People have got preconceived ideas. People don't necessarily know anything other than what the media tells them about sex work. So we're here at Leicester, we're really trying to make those changes. So moving on to the next slide, I'm just going to give a very brief overview of some of the research that have informed the policy. Student sex work is certainly not new. It's been there for many, many years. I've been researching for 20 years, and students involved in all kinds of markets in the sex industry have always been there. And some of the headlines are here. There was quite an important study done by the University of Swansea by Debbie Jones and Tracy Sagar back in 2015. And the project was just on Wales, but we do have some headline evidence there to think about the importance of student sex work. Their survey had over 600 students respond, and there was 5% of students had worked in sex work, with another 20% who had considered this. Now, this is results from 2015. There's been lots of changes since then, developments in the sex markets. We know the movement online has happened quite dramatically this year, particularly because of people's lives moving online essentially during the pandemic restrictions. So we know increasingly in a recession that things like sex work, informal economies, they grow. So we are expecting sex work to become a place where many people get there, earn money. This is of course not just about female sex work, it's about male sex work and trans. The Swansea project was very helpful there, flagging up male sex work as well. But also what that Swansea project did was it did highlight that students do disclose to academics and to university staff for whatever reason about their sex work, and often the staff in universities are not prepared, they're not trained, they don't understand the issues or how to respond. And I've really taken that to the working group at Leicester to really think about how universities should be responding and their responsibilities and duties of care there. So where we are today really is about using that evidence, using that knowledge to understand that students are going to engage in sex work and to move forward with trying to respond to that. The work that we've been doing both at Leicester and nationally is informed by lived experience. And I'm now going to hand over to Jessica, who's going to talk a little bit more about the lived experience and the students she works with. Over to you, Jess.
Thanks, Tila. Hello, my name is Jess, and I'm a University of Manchester graduate, an MA student, a mental health support worker, and I'm also a former sex worker. I founded and run Support for Student Sex Workers, a sex worker-led support organisation, which is currently the only one of its kind in the country. We support student sex workers and anyone who identifies with the sex work community with one-to-one support session and group support sessions, careers and academic advice, CV checks, wellbeing activities, and opportunities to build creative portfolios. At the University of Manchester, where we have the Support for Student Sex Workers Society, we are also able to offer support with rape allegations on campus, which is a huge victory to me as a survivor who had little support during my undergraduate studies. The sex work community is made up from people from all walks of life and all sorts of backgrounds. Not everybody hates their jobs. Some people like what they do, but they still deserve to have support. Having been doing this for about a year and a half now, we have never turned a sex worker away. I've realised that there is such a wide range of needs for support, and not all of them are well understood in society. It is important that sex workers have somewhere to go, free from judgment and with people who understand. Sometimes I meet with or speak on the phone to people who just need confirmation that they are not alone. Sometimes I talk with people just for them to let me in on their escapades because it's nice to have someone to share with. And sometimes I speak with full service sex workers who have been underpaid or had refusal of payment, and they just want to know that what has happened is rape. Whilst everyone that comes to me has a completely different experience and is searching for something different, I've noticed that the fear that there is nowhere else to go is universal. Sex work is so badly stigmatized that people are afraid to go to the universities for support, and this should not be the case. We need to open up a safe dialogue so that people who need support feel they will be safe in going for help. Many student sex workers have had bad experiences with going for support. Even if it hasn't happened to them, everybody knows a story or has a friend who has been let down by the system because they are a sex worker. I was discharged from a prominent rape recovery unit in Manchester because I told them I was a sex worker and that I needed help to stop for my mental health. For so long after this, I felt so much shame, which I was unable to recover from without receiving support and acceptance, empathy and understanding that came with the support. Sex workers often feel shame. However, there is no shame in being a sex worker, and one of the best things about my job is helping people understand this in themselves. At universities, we can support sex workers by offering a safe space, free from judgment, for people to come and ask for support without consequences, a system that universities have had in place to protect many vulnerable groups of people for years. Student sex workers often feel like they are living a double life, and it's a really special thing if someone admits to you that they're a sex worker, as this is often a very private thing that only a few people know about. As sex work is becoming more and more accepted as a viable way to make a living, the need for support is growing, and the need for universities to demonstrate compassion and understanding of the issues we face and a non-patronising approach to offering support is vital. Given the current state of affairs in the country and the recent results of the pandemic, we are seeing a rise in sex work, which means there may be people who are unaware of how to do sex work safely. It is important for the staff to be trained on this in order to protect people at risk from this. I am now going to pass over to Harriet, who is going to discuss the journey of the Students' Union here at the University of Leicester.
Thank you, Jess. And Chelsea, if you can put up the slide as well, if possible. Thank you. If you could go on to slide 2, which is just the next one. Thanks, Chelsea. So yes, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And again, thank you for Culture Shift for hosting, and to all of the other speakers that are joining us today to talk about our journey with this work. So as Tila's mentioned, the involvement from an academic perspective in work around sex work has been at the university for a number of years, but it took a more organisational approach around last November, December, and I'm going to talk a little bit about where this work came from, as you will be able to see on the slide, but also the involvement of Standing Together, which is the University of Leicester's university-wide initiative to tackle unacceptable behaviours and support any students affected. And hopefully I'll be able to articulate kind of how those areas of work intersect. So as I said, around November, December last year, we joined forces with the Students' Union to run a campaign around supporting student sex workers. In the Students' Union at the time, the president had quite a focus on this and wanted to do some work in this area in order to provide education and information in this area for people to start the conversation. We know that often stigma leads to poor experiences and particularly experiences of harassment and violence, and for those experiences to go unspoken and unsupported, and therefore that importance of education and information through campaigns like this was vital in starting this journey that we had. So as I said, I'm from Standing Together. I lead the university-wide initiative, but we were very keen in joining forces and talking about this collectively with the Students' Union, that we didn't want to make the presumption or make the or infer that sex workers were always going to be subjected to unacceptable behaviours. as Jess says, there's many sex workers of different kinds and different backgrounds and different reasons for wanting to get into sex work. And of course, we do not equate sex work with sex exploitation. So it was very important to us from the beginning that we did not equate those things unnecessarily, and that we were able to provide information and education. And of course, we were able to vitally provide information about support options should they be needed. At the time, as part of the campaign, we were running this alongside our 16 days of activism, which is something that Standing Together at the University of Leicester has marked now for the last 4 years. So we had this as sort of a theme around that time, particularly looking at sex workers. And so red umbrellas were hung from the Students' Union ceiling in the building to show solidarity with sex workers and to vitally show solidarity with the rights of sex workers as well. At the time as well, we also had a statement released by the Vice-Chancellor and the CEO of the Students' Union, highlighting their commitment and solidarity to support the students who are sex workers. And those statements can be found on our website, and we can share links to various things that we talk about throughout, or possibly in the emails afterwards, if that would be of use to any of you. Soon after the campaign, we established a working group chaired by Professor Tila Sanders, who you've heard from, and colleagues from different areas of the institution who you will also kind of hear from as well as we go through today. That working group kind of had a focus around writing a policy and a toolkit in order to support all of this work. And as part of this, the timeline that you can see on your screen was developed by a member of my team who wanted to track our progress through this in the hope that potentially it could be useful and used by other institutions and organisations, just to show kind of the steps that we went through and the learning that we took from that. But of course, we're happy to elaborate on any of these elements as well if needed. Having this collective input into this work was incredibly important, and we're hoping to be able to, and we are able to launch the formal documentation around this. And student support, of course, will always be a priority in all of this work. So like I said, this forms part of why Standing Together are involved in this work, and in supporting students affected by any form of unacceptable behaviour, whether they be a sex worker or not. We work with the departments and services across the organisation and external to the organisation as well, in order to provide the best possible support to students. We also run awareness and engagement activities, such as the event last year, training for staff and students, and support with the development of policies and procedures. And all of this is informed by the work that we do with students on a one-to-one basis. So this work, in terms of the sex work work and commitment that we have at the university, is fit into all of those categories within Standing Together. We developed training to go alongside it. We've done the events and campaigns, part of the awareness raising in the event that we're doing today. And of course, we supported with the development of the policies and procedures. So we find that it's important to take that whole organisation approach, but also that whole systems approach when looking at a piece of work like this. And often we find with all the work that we do with Standing Together, it's useful to do that together rather than individual elements in isolation. So if there isn't, if anyone joining us from a university or a students' union, if there's an initiative or campaign or project that's similar to Standing Together, and you kind of think that might be a good place to start, this could be replicated in that way going forwards. So yes, that's kind of giving you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of where we've come from, where the work started from, how the working group was established, and kind of how we've been able to develop the policy and supported toolkits, which I will go on to a little bit later in today's session. I'm afraid you will be hearing from me again, but we will be going through the support elements a little bit in more detail a bit later on. But thinking about it from a governance perspective and how you might want to embed this work within your institutions if you're coming from that perspective. I'm now going to hand over to Faye McCarthy from the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion team, who's going to talk a little bit more about how we built it into existing frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you, Harriet. I'm just going to upload the slide if that's okay. Thank you. So whilst we're doing that, I'll just get started. So my name's Faye McCarthy. I am a Senior Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Officer within the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion team, which I'm going to refer to as EDI in my presentation. So if we could just go on to the next slide, if that's okay, please. So I'm just going to outline a bit about our EDI governance at the university and show sort of where we located the space for the student sex work alongside colleagues. And yeah, just how it aligns with other governance and structures that we have. So I sit in a team of the 6 of us. We provide advice, support and guidance for staff and students at the university on all aspects and areas of EDI. Our focus is to create a more inclusive learning, research, positive environment that is characterised by dignity and respect. Obviously we are a team, but there's also other areas of the university whose remit covers EDI and inclusivity in general as well. In terms of general work that we do, just on the right hand side there, it's training, events, networks, curriculum, equality impact assessments, but that is all characterised with our dignity and respect at Leicester policy and framework, which is on the next slide, and that's the space where we located the student sex work policy, thank you, and Toolkit alongside colleagues about a year ago, as Harriet just identified, which was led by Tila. So this dignity and respect at Leicester policy and framework that we operate in is sort of outlines our commitment around respect and dignity. It identifies unacceptable behaviours, and we have a definitions document as well. And the ownership of this is shared across the university all the way from the top. So it's a cross-university piece of work, and it just outlines our approach to unacceptable behaviours. All members of the community are expected to behave with respect and courtesy at all times, and that's sort of the key message. And in terms of linking that to the student sex work policy, then on the next slide, you will see that within the policy we have a statement which says all members of the community are expected to behave with respect and courtesy at all times and operate with a non-judgmental and supportive attitude. So that was sort of how we linked it within the policy and framework, and we do signpost to it throughout the toolkit and the policy as well. So there is that clear link and space where it's linked together. We also outline in the toolkit the ways of reporting unacceptable behaviours as well. So that's really clear, and report and support is in there for students. If we could just go on to the final slide. This just sort of gives an overview of our EDI governance structure, which I know is a lot, but it just identifies the structure that we operate. We try to work as intersectionally as we can across protected characteristics, and obviously the dignity and respect framework covers this whole governance. So we do have various working groups which operate outside of these networks or staff forum groups, and the student sex work working group was one of those, which then feeds back up into our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee, which is chaired by our Vice-Chancellor. So recognising that EDI is not just our responsibility as a team, but it's across the institution in order to try and embed inclusivity as much as we can. I'm now going to hand over to Professor Chris Wilkins, who is the Head of School of Education at the University of Leicester.
Thank you, Faye, and thank you to Culture Shift and to all my colleagues here at Leicester for actually giving me this opportunity to, and I'll be honest, an opportunity to challenge my thinking. Because when Harriet first came to me earlier this year, and obviously my role as Head of School of Education, responsible for large numbers of student teachers coming through our system, I did find this uncomfortable, and it has really given me an opportunity to examine what it is we do, what our values are, and what our duty of care to our students is, and how that fits in with our responsibility as gatekeepers for the teaching profession. And what it actually led me to do is to see the prevailing view in the teacher education community is one that sees its responsibility essentially to reflect and to enact the prevailing values of the teaching profession. And there are understandable reasons why we do this. We have to ensure our students show evidence of meeting professional standards for teachers. And I think this can lead to a risk-averse approach, and we guide our students essentially driven by what we think are the values that will prevail in schools. And for those of you who are not familiar, I think, Chelsea, if you could just share the slide, which has an extract from the teacher professional standards that student teachers are required to show evidence of meeting. So this sets out, and I think the key phrases here that I think initially I started looking at this student sex worker policy to say, okay, well, what are the key elements of this that the teaching profession might see a problem with? And I think in particular this notion of teachers upholding public trust, and in particular, obviously, as you would expect, a focus on safeguarding and not exploiting pupil vulnerability. But actually, when I challenge myself, well, what on earth does this have to do with student sex work? Actually, there is no connection here. So I think we can lose the slide. I think, Chelsea, I think people have seen enough of that. So I started talking to my colleagues. I actually went to the University Council for the Education of Teachers, which is our national networking body. It had not been raised. Nobody had ever really raised this as an issue before. We have no data on student teachers working as sex workers. I think the view was that this was seen as a non-issue for student teachers. So I took the plunge and asked for a slot at our annual conference, our USEC conference, which took place last month, to run a little discussion group on this issue. And I have to say, I think my conviction that this is seen as a non-issue in the teacher education community was kind of confirmed by that. I had a very small number of people who did attend the workshop, who were very positive about the work that Leicester are doing. What I did also outside of that meeting from people who had not come to the workshop, some varying degrees of negativity and sometimes hostility, to ask why I was even raising this as an issue. So I think that has reinforced my view, and I think I'm here to really to say that actually from a teacher education community, I think we do have a duty as a sector to really re-examine how we approach this issue of fitness to practice, and to see ourselves as being leaders of change. We have to see ourselves as actually using our position in higher education, where our role is to challenge orthodoxies, to be drivers of change. And we have a duty of care to our students, and Faye has talked about the EDI issue, Harriet has talked about the wellbeing issue. We have to protect our students and engage with them in a non-judgmental way, in a supportive way. But that's going to mean we're going to have to challenge the profession. We challenge it in lots of other ways. We have to go beyond reflecting and enacting those professional values that prevail in the teaching profession and see ourselves as actually driving change. So I think there's some really, really important work to do here. There's some work to do across higher education and particularly in the teacher education world. But then that means that we then have to reach out into the professions that we serve. So my impression is that where probably similar things are going to be seen in healthcare professions, nursing, social work, medicine, law, all of those higher education sectors where we are providing professional accreditation. I think we need to work with our professional bodies to raise issue, and that's the real reason why I think this is such an important policy. And in my role as head of School of Education, that's why I want to give this this policy may support. And I want to continue working with colleagues to keep on raising the profile of that at sector level. Thank you. Sorry, I've forgotten who I'm handing to. Sorry.
It's back to Harriet.
I'm coming back to Harriet. Sorry, I lost track of where I was going. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you so much for joining us. I think it wouldn't have meant the same coming from me pretending to be you or voicing your views on this and your support, your ongoing support. But as Chris mentioned as well, that we have engaged with other fitness to practice courses at the university around this area, and we've been so incredibly lucky with the support that they've shown us in this area, and actually the willingness to challenge themselves personally and professionally around this as well. And again, as Chris said, this is just the start. We are very much aware that this is the start of a much longer process and journey for the university around this work. There's more we can and need to be doing around training, around embedding this policy in different processes for staff and students, and around culture change. And ultimately, we are aware and very cognizant of the fact that we are only able to change what is within our community, and then hopefully can be role modelling that behaviour and that inclusion and acceptance for other organisations to pick up as well, and hopefully drive some of that change a little bit more actively as well. So there's definitely more to do. Apology, I've gone off piece a little bit there and got on my soapbox, but I think Chris raised some really good points, and I think just to sort of show our thinking and show our working around this, I think is quite important. So following off on that, I think it's important to say that the focus of the policy and why we feel it's so important to be launching it, particularly around the International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers within the Dignity and Respect framework, with that buy-in across the university, is to support our students. That's the fundamental bottom line of it all. So I'm going to cover a few of the support options that are available. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we are using the report and support system to support in the development of this work, and the sharing of the resources around this work as well. For those of you who are joining us as Cultureship and Report and Support licensees, it might be of particular interest to you, but for other organisations as well, there might be some things that you can take on board. So as I mentioned earlier, I lead on the Standing Together initiative, which sits within Student Support Services at the University of Leicester. We have specific teams within Student Support Services focusing on different areas of support and wellbeing, which students can benefit from, all students. Student Support Services include those separate teams and can provide specific advice and guidance. But of course, we do work, as I mentioned earlier, with specialist external services as well, if required. And our Students' Union has an advice service as well, which supports students independently to the university. So just going to sort of briefly talk you through some of the resources that we have on our report and support system and how we use that. So generally as a system, we use it as a disclosure and referral tool for our students or staff on behalf of students currently, to let us know about any unacceptable behaviour that they've been subjected to. We don't use it as a formal reporting mechanism, and I could talk for the whole day, if not longer, around how we use the system, and I'm more than happy to answer specific questions about that if people have those kinds of questions. But we have a series of multiple choice questions, and we do not expect anyone to provide any more information than they're comfortable and happy to provide on that system. And likewise, throughout the whole support process and potentially reporting process, if they are going to go on to that, either internally or externally, we fully appreciate and understand how students may not want to disclose their sex worker status as part of that. But you know, I want to put the message out there to say that my team and the wider Student Support Services who support students in this way are aware of that and are here to support, irrelevant to any of that. So we use report and support as that disclosure tool and as that referral mechanism, but we also use the support pages and support functions of the tool and the campaigns function as well to provide more information and resources for all of the things that we talk about. So that's currently where a lot of the resources and guidance and support for student sex workers particularly that's where a lot of those resources are housed, and it's also where our policy and toolkits are now housed, along with some other internal sites through the Dignity and Respect framework, as Faye's mentioned. So within those resources, we've got 2 toolkits, which have been developed kind of through that national work and input, but also with a specific University of Leicester stamp. So we've got a specific University of Leicester staff toolkit, which feeds into the disclosure guidance that we've developed more centrally through student support services to provide specific guidance around disclosures of sex worker status. And we've also got information and guidance and signposting there to internal and external specialist support as well. We've also got a student toolkit on the web pages that will go alongside the policy and sort of be housed all together collectively, again to sort of show that holistic approach that we're taking to all of this work. So yes, that's report support, that's the toolkit and some of the resources that we have alongside. And I am going to wrap up there, unless of course anyone, if you've got specific questions on how we support students or how we use report support, I'm happy to answer those. But I just want to say that we wholeheartedly stand in solidarity with our students in sex work, and we do really hope that this work is just the beginning for the University of Leicester, but also across the sector. So thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers there. I am going to go to some questions that we've had now. So we've had quite a few questions, and I would encourage you to either email them to events@culture-shift.co.uk or pop them in the chat at the bottom of the Zoom function, and I will try and get through as many as I can. I'm going to ask the first question to probably put that to Tila and Harriet. How can universities go about destigmatising sex work so that students feel that they can go to them for support with no judgment?
Shall I take that one? Thanks. Great comments and great questions. Well, I think the first thing that we're trying to do, obviously we've made the toolkits with various lived experience put into that, but really is about education. We know lots of staff don't really know much about sex work, and why should they? So it is about starting from education, about what the law is, what sex work is, the fact that many students might not necessarily identify it as a sex worker, particularly ones working online. So we're really wanting to train staff. Obviously universities have hundreds of thousands of staff across the country, and we really think, like any of these issues around diversity, a lot of it is about unconscious bias, and it is really starting from that point of understanding what sex work is, the law in this country, and also the experiences of sex workers, as Jess has outlined, and as we have testament really to the real quite awful experiences of some students in the past, being excluded, being expelled from courses, being kicked off courses because of morality clauses, blackmailed, all kinds of things that people are probably aware of. And certainly we know that from the sex work community and people who get in touch with us. So really it's a point of education of staff is really quite key to this, to really to identify the kind of things that students might be coming to them with, and that may be something from really quite serious safeguarding issues, or their concerns, or violence at work, for example, or blackmail through people they may be working for, to non-sex work related issues, but sex work may affect their experiences because they're having to hide what they're doing, how they're getting money. As Jess said, lots of people living double lives. So it really is about education of staff. It's a priority. So,
yeah,
Harriet?
that's really interesting, and it might build on sort of my next question, Harriet, which you mentioned in the first part of your presentation, that it was really important for you to take a whole institution approach, which I wholeheartedly agree with, because you can't just have pockets of good practice. But given the stigma around sex work and just people's biases and everything that Tila mentioned, was it a challenge to encourage that from the institution?
Yes, is the short answer. I think it's also, again, worth noting that this is just the beginning of what we want to do around this area of work. We've engaged specifically with fitness to practice courses on this for specific reasons, and as Chris outlined. But we by no means gone to every single department, academic and professional services, and kind of said, what do you think? How do you feel about this? It's been socialised and communicated at various levels of the organisation, but I know kind of part of Tila's plan going forward, as she's mentioned, is to go out into those different spaces and have that conversation. And we think that's so important, rather than just saying, here's the policy, do it. Just to say, okay, this is what we stand for as an institution. I think it kind of links to the last question as well. I think it's important for staff to recognise what it means for them. So within student support services, maybe it's more obvious, because this is about supporting students. Within EDI, maybe it's more obvious. Within certain courses, maybe it's more obvious. But ultimately, student sex workers can be across the board, and they could, in theory, disclose their sex worker status as part of anything else, as Tila mentioned, at any point to any member of staff. So even just looking at it from that perspective, not a selfish perspective, but for want of a better word, even looking at it from that selfish perspective of, if a student comes to me and discloses this, will I know what to say? Will I know where to signpost them to? Will I know how to support them as best as I can? And we're not expecting staff to step out of their role into something different or to be something that they're not. We're just expecting staff to show that supportive, non-judgmental approach to all students. And this is supporting them in doing that, we hope. So looking at it from that perspective in terms of what does it mean to me? What does it mean for me? Hopefully looking at it like that might help. And I know that's kind of how we want to have some of those conversations moving forward. But yeah, it is difficult. It will be difficult. Like I said, this is about a culture change. And as you know, and as your organisation stands for, Gemma, that doesn't happen overnight. And that's why we've been working, it's been great for us to be working together for the last couple of years as well around all of this. And like you said, that whole institution approach, it's a massive piece of work. We don't underestimate that. But yeah, we're hopeful, and we're positive about the next steps in that.
Definitely. I'm going to come to some more questions, but Harriet, I think there's like something brushing against your microphone, so I just wondered whether you could maybe
I'll
hold
lift
it,
that out.
if that's okay. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to sort of paraphrase, I think, a couple of questions that we've had, which are kind of on similar themes, which is how you at the university are managing the conflict between supporting student sex workers, but also protecting them from exploitation. I'm not sure kind of who is best to, maybe Tila? Or Harriet again. So how are you supporting the conflict between student sex workers and making sure that you're living up to your duty of care and protecting them from exploitation?
Sure. Yeah, the issue of safeguarding is obviously really paramount. We're really taking safeguarding very seriously, but I think we start from the position is if students don't feel comfortable talking about doing sex work to staff or to welfare, or whatever, however they encounter the university, they're certainly not going to come and report issues around safeguarding or issues of violence or coercion or all the other things that people usually associate with doing sexual services. So I think safeguarding is always there, and obviously we're trained as academics, as welfare staff, we've all got safeguarding of adults in our minds, and I think that's never away from our minds. But I think it is a misnomer to think that should be the first thing we talk to students who are doing sex work about. We obviously know, and lots of my research has been done around the levels of violence against sex workers, but we also know that's not everybody's experience. There are much safer ways to work, particularly online, and people engage in sex work in very different ways. We know from the Swansea research that often people engage regularly as students, so it's not something they will do all the time or be their main way that they get money. So we know it's something that students dip in and out of, so their experiences may be different from what other people may have experienced. So I think, yes, safeguarding obviously is a priority, and that's one of the things we did when we're creating the policy. We consulted with our safeguarding officers and made sure that was really embedded. So that's not going to be in any way minimised. and also as reporting and supporting students experiencing any kind of sexual violence. As the Me Too on Campus campaign shows, sexual violence is a really big issue on campus as well. That's really integrated into our responses.
And just to add to that, if I can as well, I think it comes down to empowerment and informed choice. I think sometimes as a university, sometimes as universities, we are seen as that loco in parentis, that parental kind of figure. And actually, I think we need to question who we are as an institution to determine what's right and what's wrong for that student to engage in. If we know that they are empowered in that decision making and they are informed in that choice, we need to work with and not supposedly for these marginalised groups across the board, as I think Jess kind of touched on. A lot of work around oppressed groups and marginalised groups has been going on in universities for a short while now, but we need to look at it in a similar way, in that we need to work with them and hear from them and use their voices and empower them to make the decisions, and we are giving no illusions that things like violence and harassment don't happen within sex work. That's why, one of the reasons why it's couched within our dignity and respect policy, which has that framework around support and accessing support. And I think that is our role as an institution, to make sure that our students are empowered and are making informed choices for themselves as adults. Most of the time as adults, just to say.
Thank you. So I'm also going to so here's another question, which I think is kind of quite straight, sort of not obvious, but like a straightforward question, which I'd just be interested to get your answer and reaction to. So, given that a lot of students start sex work because they are in a financially difficult situation, why don't the university just exempt students who are involved in prostitution from paying fees? Who wants to take that question?
I just think that the universities, or any university's accountant, just raising their eyebrows there. I think this comes back to the law, really. I think ultimately, if we're in a criminalised situation in relation to selling sexual service, even though most things are legal, we're in a criminalised framework, so people cannot sign up to be sex workers in the full sense of it, acknowledging it as a job, as labour. So I think while we're in that very hiatus, quasi-grey legal area around the law, then we can't be expected to think of anything else than this as an informal economy, of which obviously we wouldn't be expecting students to kind of bear the brunt of that economic and legal anomaly. We might be in a situation in the future where decriminalisation exists, and then that's a different case. But I'm not sure people will be asking, if people are making money as a beautician, whether we should not be telling them to not pay fees, really. I think we all pay. We've had these conversations a lot in COVID times. Students pay ultimately for quality education. So I think there's a whole other discussion going on there. I'm not sure if Chris has got a comment for that one.
I think Jess also looked like she wanted to add to that. Like, if you want to, Jess, you look like you were leaning in about to about to say something.
It's just that I think that this can only be seen as a really positive thing. As someone that has done both voluntary sex work and forced sex work, I know that if I had this while I was at university, I would have felt much more safe. And I really think that this is most definitely the start of a very positive thing for all sex workers.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to another question, which again is sort of a culmination of a few similar themed questions that we've been asked. And it links back to that duty of care theme again. So some people would say that you have a duty of care to support students to not enter the sex work industry. Why do you think it's important to support students in this the situation that they're in, rather than the one you wished they were in? I'm going to put that to Harriet, if that's okay.
So again, it comes down to that choice of students. There's lots of part-time work that I wouldn't have wanted to engage in when I was a student. It's not for me or anybody to say what is right or wrong within that. Sex work is work, and if we are confident and competent in communicating that through policies, toolkits, work like this, we can be sure and we can be comfortable in our choice as a university to support students in the choices that they are making. As with everything, students are able to access support regardless of their part-time work, regardless of their job, and that includes financial support if that's the case. So we would support any student financially or with their mental well-being, or if they've been subjected to any form of unacceptable behaviour, whether that was in relation to sex work or not, and whether that was the reason that they went into sex work or not. So I think it's about, again, taking that whole institutional approach, thinking about what your stance as a university is, and actually whether that is your decision to be making, or whether actually as a university you've just got a duty to educate, and that includes this area as well. I hope that answers it a little bit.
I've got another question here. So as women and trans women are both at high risk within the sex industry, there is some overlap, but some risks / experiences are different. Have there been any thoughts or concerns raised by gender or LGBT forums when you were writing this policy and toolkit? Sorry.
Hey, that's okay. Do you want to comment on that? Is that okay? Thank you.
Of course. So no, there haven't been concerns. I suppose there has been discussion in both of those staff forums. They are staff forums, with representation from the SU officers, and the SU were involved in our working group as well, so they could then take that back to their student societies if and when necessary. But I suppose we recognise that, and we do reference our protected characteristics, marginalised groups within the policy and the toolkit, and our support is available for all. So yes, it has been discussed, and we did discuss that within the working group as well.
And I guess it's just a constant ongoing discussion, like all of this. I think everyone, especially within the higher education sector, wants to be given the answers and go, right, do this and it will work. And unfortunately, culture change doesn't really happen like that. We've got to be courageous, I would say, and be prepared to try new things and learn and be agile and change them if that you find something that isn't quite working. And I think that just the sector as a whole is a little bit nervous of working that way. But I think it's important, if we are going to change the culture, that we do that. I've got one, I think this will probably be our maybe penultimate or last question, depending on if any of others are asked. Are there any other plans to do another survey, which is similar to the Student Sex Worker Project one, but one that is UK-wide, to really map sex work throughout the UK and different types of sex work, different demographics, etc., specifically amongst the student population?
That's a great question. I mean, generally, the answer is not at this point in time, but I think obviously there was limitations on just having a survey on Wales. That's just how the funding happened for the team down there. But I think I've been involved in large projects called Beyond the Gaze about online sex work, and students are involved in that, and there are others out there. So I think we do have a decent evidence base. A couple of caveats on methodology: it's hard to track student sex work involvement because it's so fluid, and people on this call may certainly know how it's really hard to track. There's issues of identification. We have got some Home Office survey from 2019. But I would really like to. I think ultimately we need to keep up the knowledge, and maybe in the future doing something across the 4 nations would be a really good way to find out new knowledge, new demographics. So we are picking things up like trans, people of colour, migrants, people, overseas students. That's a real area of possible risk. But certainly we need to know more about how international students experience sex work. So there's lots of areas I think that we do need to build up knowledge, and we just need to find a nice funder. A funding question.
And I think my sort of parting question, because we've got a couple of minutes left, what support can, obviously you've publicly launched this today, and like I said earlier, the recording will be of this discussion will be available to share afterwards, but what support can you provide to other universities looking to take on some of the learnings from this innovative work?
Thank you, Gemma. It's really great. I need to give a couple of shout outs. I know Gaynor Truman, she's been a researcher on this project. She's here today. Gaynor and Jessica and myself are taking forward, we've got money from the ESRC to do an outreach programme to higher education organisations and organisations responsible for students for the next 18 months, starting in January. So we're offering free training, free work around the things we've done to kind of take people through it, get the right people around the table. So please do get in contact. This is entirely free, supported under the Impact Acceleration account. So we've got lots of things there. So if anyone out there is from a university who is keen, as I said before, there's a national coordination group. We've got various regional groups in Leeds, Manchester, London, Wales, and lots of things going on. So please do get in contact and we can take the conversations forward.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for allowing us to host this discussion today. It's often a really contentious subject, but it's so important if we are to help student sex workers who are currently feel like they can't access support. It's so important that we start to move the dial on that. So thank you so much for all the hard work that you've done and for publicly launching your toolkit and policy. As I said earlier, we'll be sharing the recording afterwards. This is Culture Shift's final webinar of 2020, but we will be doing lots more throughout 2021 as part of our commitment to sharing thinking and best practice in this area. If anyone's got any further questions, then please email us and we'll put them to the panelists that we've had today. Thank you all very much for joining us.